I was standing in my driveway on a Thursday morning, watching Atlas and Titan run through their patrol drills, when Deborah Morrison came storming across the street with her phone held high like it was Excalibur. My two Belgian Malinois immediately stopped mid-exercise, their ears perking up at the approaching commotion, but they held their positions perfectly because that's what $70,000 of FBI training gets you. This is absolutely unacceptable. Deborah shrieked, her face already turning that particular shade of crimson that I'd come to recognize during the 3 months since I'd moved into this pristine suburban nightmare in Scottsdale, Arizona. Those vicious beasts are a menace to this entire neighborhood, and I'm calling animal control right now. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that losing my temper wouldn't help the situation. Good morning, Deborah. The dogs are on my property behind an 8-foot fence conducting their daily training exercises. They haven't bothered anyone. They're barking at all hours, she continued, her perfectly manicured nail jabbing at her phone screen. They're intimidating, Mrs. Chen from 3 houses down said she's afraid to walk past your house. That was interesting considering Mrs. Chen had stopped by just yesterday to bring me homemade dumplings and spend 20 minutes cooing over Atlas while he sat perfectly still and let her scratch behind his ears. But I'd learned quickly that Deborah Morrison, president of the Saguaro Heights Homeowners Association, had a somewhat flexible relationship with the truth. The dogs don't bark unless there's a legitimate security concern, I said calmly. And they're always supervised when they're outside. I don't care what your excuses are, William, Deborah snapped, using my full name like she was my mother scolding me for tracking mud through the house. This is a family neighborhood, not a police compound. Those animals need to go. I felt my jaw tighten. These dogs aren't going anywhere. They're professionally trained working dogs and they're part of my work. Your work? Deborah laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. You don't even leave for an office. You sit at home all day with those monsters. For all we know, you're running some kind of illegal operation out of your garage. Before I could respond, she was already speaking into her phone. Yes, hello. Animal control. I need to report 2 extremely dangerous dogs at 4237 Saguaro Heights Drive. They're constantly aggressive. They bark all night, and they've been threatening the residents. I'm the HOA president, and we need someone here immediately. I watched her spin her fabricated emergency with growing irritation. Atlas and Titan sat perfectly at attention, their dark eyes fixed on me, waiting for commands. They were the picture of discipline, which made Deborah's characterization of them as dangerous even more absurd. Someone will be here within the hour, Deborah announced triumphantly, ending her call. And when they see what a hazard you're keeping, those dogs will be impounded. You're making a mistake, I said quietly. The only mistake was the review board approving your purchase, she shot back. I voted against it, you know. I could tell you'd be trouble the moment I saw your application. No wife, no children, keeping odd hours, and now these vicious animals. You don't fit the community standards. She turned on her designer heels and marched back across the street to her immaculate Tudor-style house that probably violated about 15 different architectural authenticity standards, but somehow received HOA approval anyway. I watched her go, then looked down at my dogs. Come on, guys. Let's get you inside before this circus really gets started. Both dogs immediately rose and followed me through the side gate into the house. In the kitchen, I filled their water bowls and checked my watch. If animal control was really coming within an hour, I had some calls to make. I pulled out my phone and dialed Marcus Chen's number. He picked up on the second ring. Wesley, what's up? You're not calling this early unless something's wrong. HOA president just called animal control on Atlas and Titan, claims they're dangerous and threatening the neighborhood. There was a pause, then Marcus laughed. Are you serious? Those are two of the most disciplined K9s in the entire Southwest Division. They literally helped take down an interstate trafficking ring last month. I'm aware. I was there. Right, sorry. So what do you need? Can you get in touch with Director Hammond? I have a feeling this is going to escalate and I'd rather have documentation ready. On it. I'll have him call you directly. And Wesley, don't let them bully you. You're on approved leave for good reason and you have every right to keep your partners with you. After we hung up, I sat down at my kitchen table and waited. Atlas rested his head on my knee and I scratched behind his ears absently. These dogs weren't just pets. They were my partners, my colleagues, and honestly, my lifeline after everything that had happened 6 months ago in Denver. The doorbell rang 45 minutes later. Through the window, I could see an animal control truck parked in my driveway, and Deborah Morrison standing on my porch alongside a young officer who looked barely out of college. She'd actually waited around to witness what she clearly expected to be my humiliation. I opened the door, keeping Atlas and Titan in a sit-stay position behind me in the hallway. "Good morning," the officer said, consulting his tablet. "I'm Officer Rodriguez with Maricopa County Animal Control. We received a complaint about aggressive dogs at this address." "Good morning, Officer Rodriguez. I'm William Winters. The dogs in question are professionally trained FBI K9 units. They're not aggressive and they haven't threatened anyone." Deborah made a scoffing sound. Of course he'd lie about that. "Those dogs bark constantly and lunge at anyone who walks by." Officer Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. "Sir, can I see the dogs?" "Absolutely." I stepped aside, allowing him a clear view of Atlas and Titan sitting calmly in the hallway, their attention focused entirely on me, not reacting at all to the stranger's presence. The officer's expression changed immediately. "Those are Belgian Malinois." "That's correct. Working dogs. FBI certified narcotics and apprehension specialists. I'm Special Agent William Winters, currently on administrative leave recovering from a service-related injury. These are my assigned K9 partners." Deborah's face went through several interesting color changes. "That's ridiculous. There's no way those are actual FBI dogs. You're making this up." Officer Rodriguez was already taking notes on his tablet, his entire demeanor shifting from enforcement mode to professional courtesy. "Madam, I need to conduct my inspection. Sir, would you mind if I observed the dogs more closely?" "Not at all. Atlas, Titan, come." Both dogs immediately stood and walked to my side, their movements fluid and controlled. Officer Rodriguez crouched down, extending his hand slowly. Atlas sniffed politely, his tail giving a small, controlled wag. "May I?" Rodriguez asked. "Go ahead. They're friendly when they're off duty." Rodriguez spent the next 10 minutes examining both dogs, checking their physical condition, observing their behavior, and even testing their responses to various commands I gave in German. Throughout the entire inspection, Deborah stood on my porch with her arms crossed, her expression growing increasingly pinched. Finally, Rodriguez stood and made a few more notes. "Mr. Winters, your dogs are clearly well trained, well cared for, and show absolutely no signs of aggression. Their physical condition is excellent, they respond immediately to commands, and they've demonstrated textbook perfect behavior during this entire interaction. I see no basis for the complaint." "This is outrageous," Deborah exploded. "I'm telling you these dogs are dangerous. Just last week, one of them growled at my grandson." "How old is your grandson?" I asked. "He's 7 and he was terrified." "Was he on my property?" Deborah hesitated just a fraction too long. He was riding his bicycle on the sidewalk, which is public property. Actually, according to the HOA bylaws that you're so fond of citing, the sidewalks in this development are privately maintained and technically part of each homeowner's property easement. So if your grandson was on the sidewalk in front of my house, he was on my property. And I'm guessing one of the dogs noticed him reaching over my fence. Her silence was confirmation enough. Officer Rodriguez closed his tablet. Madam, it sounds like the dog was exhibiting normal protective behavior when a child approached the property boundary. That's not aggression. That's exactly what a trained protection dog is supposed to do. Mr. Winters, I'll be filing a report that closes this complaint with no action required. I apologize for wasting your time. You're just doing your job, officer. I appreciate your thoroughness. Wait. Deborah moved to block Rodriguez's path. You can't just leave. There has to be something you can do. These animals don't belong in a residential neighborhood. Rodriguez's expression hardened slightly. Madam, I've conducted a full inspection. The dogs are licensed, vaccinated, properly contained, and show no behavioral issues. There's nothing more I can do here. If you continue to file false reports, you could be charged with misuse of emergency services. He nodded to me and headed to his truck. Deborah stood on my porch, practically vibrating with fury. This isn't over, she hissed. I'll bring this to the full HOA board. We'll vote to ban dangerous breeds from the neighborhood. Belgian Malinois aren't on any dangerous breed lists, I pointed out. They're one of the most trainable and stable breeds in existence. That's why they're used by law enforcement and military worldwide. I don't care what they're used for. This is my neighborhood, and I decide what's acceptable. Actually, you're one vote on a 7-member board. And according to the HOA bylaws, I read very carefully before purchasing this property, breed-specific bans require a unanimous board vote and a 2/3 approval from all homeowners. Good luck with that. I gently closed the door before she could respond. Through the window, I watched her storm back to her house, her phone already pressed to her ear. I had a feeling this was just the opening act. My phone rang. Director Hammond's name appeared on the screen. Sir, thanks for calling back. Marcus filled me in. HOA president called animal control on Atlas and Titan. Director Richard Hammond's voice carried that particular tone of disbelief, mixed with dark amusement, that I'd heard many times during my 8 years with the Bureau. Animal control just left. Officer Rodriguez was very professional, confirmed there were no issues, and closed the complaint. You anticipate further problems. The HOA president, Deborah Morrison, made it pretty clear this isn't over. She's threatening to push for a breed ban through the HOA board. Can she do that? Theoretically, yes, but it would require a unanimous board vote and 2/3 homeowner approval. She'd have a hard time getting that, especially since several neighbors have already met the dogs without incident. Hammond was quiet for a moment. Wesley, you know I approved your administrative leave so you could recover properly. The Bureau psychiatrist was clear that keeping Atlas and Titan with you was crucial for your psychological recovery after the Denver incident. If this HOA situation is going to compromise that, we need to address it. I'm not leaving, sir. This is the first place that's felt stable in months. I'm not letting some power-hungry HOA president drive me out. Understood? I'm going to have our legal department draft a letter to the HOA board explaining that Atlas and Titan are working federal K-9 units temporarily housed with their handler during authorized leave, and that any action taken against them could be considered interference with federal agents. That should slow them down. I appreciate that, sir. How are you doing otherwise? Therapy sessions still on schedule, twice a week. Dr. Martinez says I'm making good progress. Good. The Bureau needs you back, Wesley, but not until you're actually ready. Don't let this HOA nonsense set you back. After we hung up, I spent the rest of the day working with Atlas and Titan in the backyard, running through their training exercises and playing some recreational fetch to keep them loose and happy. They were working dogs, but they were also living creatures who needed downtime and affection. Mrs. Chen stopped by around 4 in the afternoon, leaning over the fence with a concerned expression. "William, I heard Deborah called animal control on your beautiful dogs. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Mrs. Chen." The officer confirmed there weren't any issues. "That woman," Mrs. Chen shook her head disgustedly. "She's been making everyone miserable since she became HOA president 2 years ago. Did you know she fined the Johnsons $500 because their Halloween decorations were up 3 days past November 1st? 3 days. That seems excessive. She lives for this kind of thing. Power is like a drug to her, Mrs. Chen glanced around conspiratorially, then lowered her voice. "There's a group of us who have been talking about calling for new HOA elections. We might need your vote when the time comes. You'll have it." That night, I was working in my home office, reviewing case files from ongoing investigations I was consulting on remotely, when Atlas suddenly lifted his head from his bed in the corner and gave a low, warning growl. Titan, who'd been sprawled across the hallway, immediately came alert as well. I checked the security system I'd installed shortly after moving in. Multiple cameras covered every angle of the property, and the motion sensors were highly sensitive. The exterior camera showed someone moving along the fence line in my backyard, staying just outside the property boundary but clearly trying to peer in. I recognized Deborah's son, Trevor Morrison, a man in his early 30s who still lived with his mother despite being perfectly capable of independence. He had his phone out, apparently filming my backyard. I grabbed my own phone and called the Scottsdale Police non-emergency line. "Scottsdale Police, how can I help you?" "This is William Winters at 4237 Saguaro Heights Drive. I have someone trespassing around the perimeter of my property, filming my yard. He's technically in the easement area, but it's clear he's trying to document something. I'm a federal agent, and I have sensitive security equipment that shouldn't be recorded. We'll send an officer to check it out. Please remain inside and don't confront the individual." 20 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up. I watched from my office window as 2 officers approached Trevor, who immediately became defensive. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see Trevor gesturing animatedly toward my house while the officers took notes. One of the officers knocked on my door. I answered, keeping Atlas and Titan inside. "Mr. Winters, I'm Officer Patterson. We spoke to the individual you reported. He claims he's documenting dangerous dogs on behalf of the Homeowners Association." "Officer Patterson, I'm Special Agent William Winters with the FBI. The dogs in question are my certified K9 partners. Animal control was called here this morning by the man's mother and cleared the dogs completely. Now, they're apparently conducting surveillance on my property. I have security equipment and sensitive materials related to ongoing federal investigations in my home. Unauthorized recording of my property could compromise those investigations." Officer Patterson's expression became more serious. "You have your credentials, Agent Winters." I retrieved my FBI identification and badge from the safe in my office and showed them to the officer. He examined them carefully, then nodded. "I'll speak with Mr. Morrison again." He needs to understand that filming law enforcement residences and equipment can constitute a criminal offense depending on intent. I watched as Patterson returned to Trevor and had a much more serious conversation. Trevor's defensive posture crumbled into something more like panic, as Patterson apparently explained the potential legal consequences of his actions. After a few more minutes, Trevor hurried back to his mother's house, and the officers departed. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Director Hammond sent that letter to your HOA. Should arrive tomorrow via courier. Want to grab drinks this weekend?" I texted back. "Sounds good. Might need them after this week." The next morning, I was awakened at 6 by the sound of my doorbell ringing insistently. Atlas and Titan immediately moved to alert positions, but I commanded them to stay as I checked the security monitor. A courier stood at my door holding a clipboard, and in the driveway, I could see Deborah Morrison marching down the street in her bathrobe, clearly having spotted the official-looking vehicle. I opened the door and signed for a large envelope with the FBI seal clearly visible. The courier handed it over just as Deborah reached my walkway. "What is that?" she demanded. "Who sent that?" "Good morning, Deborah. This is correspondence from my employer regarding the situation yesterday." "Your employer?" she laughed. "You mean the people you've been lying to about being a federal agent. That's fraud, you know. I could report you." The courier, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense expression, glanced at Deborah with barely concealed disdain. "Madam, I just delivered official FBI correspondence." "I'm pretty sure he's not lying about his employment." Deborah's face flushed. "Well, I received a delivery this morning too, from the HOA's attorney. We're initiating formal proceedings to remove those dangerous animals from the neighborhood." I opened the envelope and scanned the letter from Director Hammond. It was even more comprehensive than I'd expected, complete with official documentation of Atlas and Titan certification, training records, service history, and a very clearly worded section explaining that any interference with the dogs or their handler could be considered obstruction of federal officers and carry significant legal penalties. "Actually, Deborah, I think you're going to want to read this. This is a formal notification from the Federal Bureau of Investigation explaining that Atlas and Titan are working federal K-9 units, that I am their assigned handler currently on approved administrative leave, and that any actions taken against them may constitute federal offenses." I held out the letter. She snatched it from my hand and began reading, her expression growing darker with each paragraph. "This doesn't change anything," she said finally, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. "The HOA has the right to enforce community standards. Federal agent or not, you still have to follow the rules. I've followed every rule in the HOA bylaws. My dogs are properly licensed, vaccinated, and contained. They haven't violated any noise ordinances or behavioral standards. You're the one who filed a false report with animal control and sent your son to conduct surveillance on my property." Trevor wasn't conducting surveillance. He was documenting evidence for the HOA board meeting. Filming a law enforcement officer's residence without permission is a crime, Deborah. The Scottsdale police explained that to Trevor last night. I'd suggest you consult with your HOA attorney before you take any further action. I closed the door and watched through the window as she stood on my walkway, rereading the FBI letter with increasing agitation. Finally, she folded it roughly and marched back to her house. The weekend passed quietly. I met Marcus for drinks at a sports bar in downtown Scottsdale, and it felt good to decompress and talk about something other than the HOA situation. Marcus had been my partner before I was assigned to work exclusively with the K-9 unit, and he understood better than most what I was dealing with in terms of recovery. "You look better," he observed, finishing his beer. "Last time I saw you, right after Denver, you were barely holding it together." Atlas and Titan help. Having something to focus on, a routine to maintain with them. It keeps me grounded. Director Hammond is serious about you taking all the time you need, you know. There's no pressure to come back until you're ready. "I know, Doctor." Martinez thinks another 2 or 3 months of therapy, and I should be cleared for active duty. But honestly, I'm not sure I want to go back to the same kind of work. The K-9 unit would keep you permanently if you wanted. They've never had a handler with your success rate. I nodded, watching the game on the television without really seeing it. Denver had been a nightmare. A routine drug bust that had turned into a hostage situation, 3 civilians killed before we could breach, and Atlas taking a bullet meant for me when the suspect opened fire. The dog had survived, but barely, and the guilt of nearly losing my partner had triggered something in me that therapy was slowly helping me unpack. "One day at a time," I said finally. Monday morning brought a new development. I found a notice taped to my front door, formally summoning me to an emergency HOA board meeting scheduled for Wednesday evening at 7. The agenda listed: discussion and vote regarding dangerous animals at 4237 Saguaro Heights Drive. I photographed the notice and sent it to Director Hammond with a brief message. "They're not backing down." His response came within minutes. "I'll have Agent Mitchell from our legal department attend with you. Don't worry." Tuesday was quiet, which made me nervous. In my experience, when someone like Deborah Morrison went silent, they were usually planning something. I spent the day working with Atlas and Titan, maintaining their training edge while also making sure they got plenty of playtime and affection. Mrs. Chen stopped by in the afternoon with more dumplings and some intelligence. "The board meeting tomorrow is going to be packed," she warned. "Deborah's been calling everyone in the neighborhood, telling them there are dangerous dogs that need to be removed. But she's also made a lot of enemies over the years. I've been making calls too, reminding people about all the ridiculous fines and violations she's enforced. I appreciate the support, Mrs. Chen. This neighborhood was a nice place before Deborah took over. She's turned it into her personal fiefdom. It's time someone stood up to her." Wednesday evening arrived faster than I would have liked. Agent Sarah Mitchell arrived at my house at 6:30, a sharp-dressed woman in her 40s with the bearing of someone who'd spent years in courtrooms. "Agent Winters, I've reviewed your situation. The HOA is on very shaky legal ground here. Federal law preempts HOA regulations when it comes to service animals and law enforcement activities. They can't enforce a ban against certified working dogs. Will they understand that?" "They will after tonight." She smiled grimly. "I've dealt with overreaching HOAs before. They tend to fold quickly when confronted with actual legal consequences." We walked to the community center at the end of the development, a modern building that served as the hub for HOA activities and neighborhood events. The meeting room was already packed with at least 50 residents, far more than I'd expected. Deborah sat at a table at the front of the room with 6 other board members, looking supremely confident. Her expression faltered slightly when she saw Agent Mitchell's FBI credentials hanging from her jacket lapel. "This meeting will come to order," Deborah announced, banging a gavel unnecessarily hard. "We're here tonight to address a serious threat to the safety and tranquility of our community. William Winters, a new resident at 4237 Saguaro Heights Drive, is keeping 2 large, aggressive dogs that have been terrorizing the neighborhood." "That's not true," Mrs. Chen called from the audience. Several other residents murmured agreement. Deborah ignored them. Animal control was called to inspect the animals, but due to some confusion about their status, no action was taken. However, as HOA president, I have a responsibility to protect this community. I'm proposing an emergency ban on all dogs over 50 pounds within the Saguaro Heights development. 50 pounds? Someone shouted. That would affect half the dogs in the neighborhood. Safety is paramount, Deborah continued. We'll discuss accommodations for existing pets, but going forward, no large dogs will be permitted. Now, Mr. Winters, would you like to respond to the concerns raised about your animals? I stood, and Agent Mitchell stood with me. Before Agent Winters responds, I need to clarify several points for the board. Mitchell's voice carried authority that immediately silenced the room. I'm Special Agent Sarah Mitchell with the FBI's legal department. I'm here tonight to ensure that this board fully understands the legal implications of the actions being proposed. Deborah's face had gone pale. The FBI has no jurisdiction over HOA matters. Actually, when those HOA matters interfere with federal law enforcement officers and equipment, we very much do have jurisdiction. Agent Winters is a decorated FBI agent currently on approved administrative leave. The dogs in question, Atlas and Titan, are FBI-certified K-9 units with service records that include major drug interdiction operations and apprehension of violent felons. They are not pets. They are federal working animals. That doesn't give them special privileges, Deborah argued, but her voice had lost its certainty. Actually, it does. Federal law preempts local regulations, including HOA covenants, when those regulations interfere with federal operations. Any ban on Agent Winters' K-9 partners would constitute interference with federal agents. Additionally, filing false reports with animal control, conducting unauthorized surveillance of law enforcement residences, and harassment of federal officers are all criminal offenses. The room erupted in whispered conversations. Several board members were looking at Deborah with expressions ranging from shock to anger. Board member James Rodriguez raised his hand. Mrs. Morrison, did you know these were FBI dogs when you called animal control? Well, he claimed they were, but I thought he was lying. Did you bother to verify before filing the complaint and calling this emergency meeting? Deborah's silence was damning. Another board member, Patricia Lai, leaned forward. Deborah, you told us these were dangerous animals that had attacked residents. You said we could be held liable if someone was injured. Was any of that true? They growled at my grandson. Because your grandson reached over Agent Winters' fence, I interjected. Which is exactly what a protection dog is trained to do. They warned a child away from a boundary they're protecting. That's not aggression. That's proper behavior. Mrs. Chen stood. I move that we table this discussion indefinitely and issue a formal apology to Agent Winters for this harassment. Seconded, called Mr. Johnson, whose Halloween decorations had apparently still rankled. You can't just shut down my proposal, Deborah practically shouted. Actually, we can. Patricia Lai looked disgusted. Deborah, you've embarrassed this entire board. You called an emergency meeting based on false pretenses. You've potentially exposed the HOA to legal liability, and you've harassed a federal agent. I move that we not only table this discussion, but also call for a vote of no confidence in your leadership. The room erupted in applause. Deborah's face cycled through several shades of red and purple. You can't do this to me. I've given 2 years to this board. 2 years of tyrannical overreach and petty enforcement, James Rodriguez said. I've been looking for an excuse to push back, and this is it. I second Patricia's motion. The vote was swift and brutal. 5 board members voted in favor of the no confidence motion, 1 abstained, and only 1 voted against it. Deborah's reign as HOA president ended right there in front of 50 witnesses. She gathered her papers with shaking hands, glaring at me with pure venom. "This is your fault. You've destroyed everything I worked for." "No, Deborah. You did this to yourself when you decided that power meant you could harass people and bend the truth to serve your agenda." She stormed out of the meeting room, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Patricia Lai took over the meeting, officially tabling the discussion about my dogs and issuing a formal apology on behalf of the board. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to thank me and ask about Atlas and Titan. I found myself answering questions about K-9 training, FBI work, and even the dog's favorite treats. It was the warmest reception I'd received since moving to Scottsdale. Agent Mitchell and I walked back to my house together. "That went better than expected," she observed. "Usually these things drag out for months." Deborah made it easy by overplaying her hand. She thought being HOA president made her untouchable. They usually do. Power corrupts, even on the smallest scales. She paused at my driveway. "How are you doing, Winters, really?" "Better. Having Atlas and Titan with me, having a purpose with their training and care, it's helped more than I expected." "Denver wasn't your fault. You know that, right? Dr. Martinez and I talk about it twice a week. I'm getting there," she nodded. "Director Hammond thinks highly of you. When you're ready to come back, the Bureau will be lucky to have you." After she left, I went inside and was immediately mobbed by 2 very excited Belgian Malinois who could sense that the tension of the past few days had finally broken. I spent an hour in the backyard with them, playing fetch and running through some lighter training exercises, just enjoying the simple pleasure of their company. Thursday morning, I was surprised to see Trevor Morrison approaching my house, moving hesitantly up the walkway without his usual swagger. I opened the door before he could knock. "Trevor." "Mr. Winters, I wanted to apologize for the filming thing and for, everything my mom did. I didn't realize those were actual FBI dogs. Would it have mattered if they weren't?" He had the grace to look ashamed. "Probably not. Mom gets an idea in her head and everyone just goes along with it because it's easier than arguing. But what happened last night, that was harsh. She's been crying since she got home." I felt a flicker of sympathy despite everything. "Trevor, your mom brought this on herself. She filed false reports, harassed me repeatedly, and abused her position of authority. Those actions have consequences. I know, she's my mom, I do know. But being someone's mother doesn't excuse behavior like that. Maybe losing the HOA presidency will be good for her. Help her focus on things that actually matter." He nodded slowly and left without another word. I watched him go, wondering if Deborah would actually learn anything from this experience or if she'd just simmer in resentment. The answer came Friday afternoon when I checked my mailbox and found a formal-looking envelope with a law firm's return address. Inside was a cease and desist letter demanding that I remove my dangerous animals from the neighborhood within 30 days or face legal action for maintaining a public nuisance. I photographed the letter and sent it to Agent Mitchell with the message. "She's hiring lawyers now." Mitchell called me within the hour. "This is actually good news." "How is being threatened with a lawsuit good news?" "Because now she's moved from HOA harassment into actual legal territory, which means everything becomes discoverable. If she pushes this to court, we can subpoena her communications, prove she knowingly filed false reports, and countersue for harassment and malicious prosecution. Most importantly, a judge will laugh this out of court in about 5 minutes. So what do I do?" Nothing. I'll have our legal department send a response to her attorney. Once they understand, they're dealing with the FBI's legal team and that their client has no case whatsoever, they'll drop this immediately. No legitimate lawyer wants to pursue a case this obviously frivolous. She was right. The following Tuesday, I received a brief letter from the same law firm withdrawing their cease and desist and apologizing for any confusion. Reading between the lines, it was clear that once they'd actually researched the situation, they'd realized Deborah had misrepresented the facts and dropped her as a client. Life in Saguaro Heights began to settle into a more comfortable rhythm. Patricia Lai proved to be a reasonable and fair HOA president, focusing on actual community improvements rather than petty enforcement. Mrs. Chen organized a neighborhood barbecue where Atlas and Titan became the guests of honor, patiently accepting attention from children and adults alike while demonstrating perfect behavior. Deborah kept to herself, rarely leaving her house. The few times I saw her, she looked away quickly, refusing to make eye contact. I felt bad for her in a way. She defined herself by her position of authority, and losing it had clearly devastated her. Then things took a darker turn. It started with small acts of vandalism. My trash cans were knocked over repeatedly, and someone spray-painted "pig" on my garage door. The mailbox was smashed with what looked like a baseball bat. Security cameras caught a figure in dark clothing and a ski mask, but the footage wasn't clear enough for identification. I reported each incident to Scottsdale police, and they increased patrols in the neighborhood, but the vandalism continued. Atlas and Titan were on high alert, their training making them hypersensitive to any unusual activity around the property. The break came 2 weeks later when Atlas woke me at 3 in the morning with a low, continuous growl that meant immediate threat. I checked the security feeds and saw someone moving toward my car in the driveway, carrying what looked like a large can. I called 911 immediately, then grabbed my service weapon from the safe and moved to the window. The figure was pouring liquid around my car, clearly visible in the glow of the street lights. Scottsdale police, stop what you're doing and put your hands up. The voice came from the street as 2 patrol cars pulled up silently, their lights still off. The figure froze, then bolted toward the side yard. Atlas and Titan were going crazy inside, barking and scratching at the door, their training telling them to pursue. The officers caught the suspect trying to climb the back fence. There was a brief struggle, and then they had him in custody. As they walked him back around to the street under the now illuminating patrol lights, I got my first clear look at his face. Deborah Morrison. The officers recovered a gas can, matches, and a detailed notebook filled with increasingly unhinged rants about me, the HOA, and various conspiracy theories about federal agents infiltrating suburban neighborhoods. It was the kind of thing that would be funny if it wasn't so disturbing. Detective Sarah Martinez arrived to process the scene. She spent an hour documenting everything, photographing the gas-soaked ground around my car, collecting the notebook as evidence, and taking my statement. "This is attempted arson," she explained. "Given that he was targeting your car with you presumably inside the house, we could probably argue attempted murder as well. He's going to be in serious trouble. What about his mother? Could she have put him up to this?" The notebook suggests this was his idea, but we'll definitely be interviewing her. If there's evidence she encouraged or assisted him, she could face conspiracy charges. The sun was coming up by the time the police finished and towed my car for evidence processing. Mrs. Chen appeared with coffee and breakfast sandwiches, shaking her head in disbelief. That poor boy. Deborah raised him to think her enemies were his enemies. This is what happens when parents teach children that revenge is acceptable. Is Deborah still at home? Police went to question her about an hour ago. I heard a lot of shouting. The full story emerged over the next few days. Trevor had been spiraling since the HOA meeting, convinced that I had destroyed his mother's life and needed to be driven out of the neighborhood. The notebook was filled with escalating plans, starting with minor vandalism and culminating in the attempted arson. Most disturbingly, there were detailed observations of my daily routines, Atlas and Titan's exercise schedules, and speculation about when the house would be most vulnerable. Deborah claimed to have no knowledge of Trevor's plans, but investigators found text messages between them where she complained bitterly about me and made comments that could be interpreted as encouraging retaliation. Nothing explicitly criminal, but enough to establish that she'd fostered his obsession. Trevor was charged with attempted arson, vandalism, stalking, and several other offenses. His bail was set high enough that Deborah had to mortgage her house to pay it. The condition of his release included staying at least 500 feet away from me and my property at all times. The HOA board held an emergency meeting to address the situation. Patricia Lai looked exhausted as she addressed the packed room. "This neighborhood has become toxic," she said bluntly. "What happened to Agent Winters is unacceptable. What happened to his property is criminal. And it all stems from one person's inability to accept that they don't control everything and everyone around them." She looked directly at Deborah, who sat in the back row with her arms crossed defensively. "Deborah Morrison, the board is initiating proceedings to fine you the maximum allowable amount for each instance of harassment, vandalism by proxy, and damage to community reputation. Additionally, we're recommending that all homeowners review the behavioral standards in our bylaws and consider whether you're in violation of the good neighbor provisions." "You can't blame me for what Trevor did," Deborah shouted. "I didn't tell him to vandalize anything." "You created an environment where your son thought that kind of behavior was acceptable," Patricia replied coldly. "You taught him that anyone who crosses you is an enemy that needs to be destroyed. That's on you." The fines totaled nearly $10,000. Combined with Trevor's legal bills and the mortgage on her house for bail, Deborah was facing financial ruin. I almost felt sorry for her until I remembered finding Trevor crouched in my driveway with a gas can, matches in hand. The criminal case moved forward steadily. Trevor's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecution wasn't interested in being lenient with someone who'd attempted arson against a federal agent's residence. The trial was scheduled for October. In the meantime, I focused on rebuilding normalcy. My car was eventually released from evidence, and I had it professionally cleaned to remove all traces of gasoline. The spray paint on my garage was covered with fresh paint, courtesy of several neighbors who showed up one Saturday morning with supplies and refused to let me reimburse them. Director Hammond called to check in. "I heard about the arrest. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sir." Atlas alerted before anything serious happened. "That dog has saved your life twice now, I'm aware. I owe him about a lifetime supply of steak. How's the therapy going, doctor?" "Martinez says you've been making excellent progress." The HOA situation has actually helped in a weird way. It gave me something external to focus on, a problem to solve that wasn't about processing trauma. Silver linings. "Listen, Wesley, I want you to know that whenever you're ready to come back, there's a position waiting for you. The K-9 unit specifically requested that you be assigned to them permanently. They want you heading up the training program. We're expanding. 4 new K-9 teams going into service next year, and they want the best handler we have running their certification process. It would be based here in Arizona, so you wouldn't have to relocate. Interested? I looked at Atlas, who was sprawled in a patch of sunlight, looking completely content. Very interested, sir. Good. We'll talk details once you're cleared for active duty. Take your time, do this right. Summer in Scottsdale was brutal, with temperatures regularly exceeding 110 degrees. I adjusted Atlas and Titan's training schedule to early mornings and late evenings, using the middle of the day for indoor work and lots of rest in the air conditioning. The neighborhood transformed as people got to know me beyond the initial drama. I became friends with James Rodriguez, who was a history professor at Arizona State University, and we started a weekly poker game with some of the other residents. Mrs. Chen taught me how to make proper dumplings from scratch. The Johnsons' daughter started dog-sitting Atlas and Titan when I needed to attend therapy sessions or FBI meetings in Phoenix. Deborah became increasingly isolated. Her house went up for sale in August, the asking price suggesting desperation. Trevor's trial was approaching, and it was clear from pretrial motions that his defense was crumbling. The evidence was overwhelming, and the prosecution had video, physical evidence, and Trevor's own detailed notebook documenting his intent. I was subpoenaed to testify, which I'd expected. What I hadn't expected was Deborah approaching me the day before the trial began. She looked terrible. The past few months had aged her visibly, her hair gone mostly gray, her face haggard with stress. She waited by my mailbox, hands clutched nervously in front of her. "William, Agent Winters." "Can I talk to you, Deborah? I know you have no reason to listen to me. I know what I did was wrong. But Trevor is my son. He's stupid and impulsive, but he's not evil. Please, when you testify tomorrow, could you maybe not make it sound as bad as it was?" I stared at her, genuinely shocked. "Deborah, your son tried to burn down my house with me and my dogs inside. That's attempted murder. I'm not going to lie under oath to protect him from the consequences of his actions. I'm not asking you to lie, just don't make him sound like a monster. Please, he's all I have. He's all you have because you drove everyone else away. You abused your authority, you harassed your neighbors, you filed false reports, and you taught your son that behavior like that is acceptable. Now he's facing serious criminal charges and you want me to help minimize them. I'll sell my house. I'll move away. I'll do whatever you want, just please don't destroy my son's life. I'm not destroying anything. I'm going to testify truthfully about what happened. What the jury decides to do with that information is up to them. But Deborah, you need to understand something. Trevor is an adult. He made adult choices. He planned for weeks to commit arson. That notebook showed clear premeditation and escalation. Even if I downplayed my testimony, which I won't, the physical evidence speaks for itself. She started crying, harsh, broken sobs that shook her whole body. I felt a stab of pity despite everything. You should get Trevor the best lawyer you can afford and hope for a plea deal. The prosecutor has offered one, I've been told. He should take it. 20 years. They want him to plead guilty and serve 20 years. Deborah, he tried to commit arson against a federal agent's residence. He's lucky they're not pursuing terrorism charges. 20 years with possibility of parole in 10 is probably the best offer he's going to get. She wiped her eyes roughly. I hope you're happy. You've completely destroyed our lives. No, you and Trevor destroyed your own lives. I just wanted to live quietly with my dogs. She walked away without another word. I watched her go, feeling emotionally drained by the entire conversation. The trial lasted 3 days. My testimony took up most of the first day. I described the vandalism incidents, the security footage, Trevor's capture by police, and the contents of his notebook. The prosecutor introduced all of it as evidence, including blown-up excerpts from the notebook showing Trevor's increasingly unhinged planning. Trevor's defense attorney tried to argue diminished capacity, suggesting that his mother's obsession had warped his thinking and made him unable to appreciate the consequences of his actions. The prosecution countered with expert testimony showing that Trevor's notebook demonstrated clear understanding of right and wrong, careful planning, and escalating criminal intent. Deborah was called as a witness. She tried to defend herself and Trevor, but under cross-examination, the prosecutor methodically demonstrated how her behavior had created the environment for Trevor's actions. The text messages were particularly damaging, showing her repeatedly characterizing me as a threat to the neighborhood who needed to be driven out. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Trevor's sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, I tried to return to some semblance of normal life. Dr. Martinez and I worked through the complicated emotions of watching someone face serious prison time for targeting me, even though I knew intellectually that Trevor had made his own choices. "You're allowed to feel conflicted," Dr. Martinez said during one session. "Feeling bad that someone is going to prison doesn't mean you think they shouldn't face consequences. It means you're a human being with empathy." I keep thinking about Deborah crying, about how destroyed she looked. She's facing the consequences of her own actions too. She taught her son that power and control were more important than empathy and community. That lesson has cost them both everything. The sentencing hearing brought no surprises. Trevor received 22 years, with possibility of parole after 12. Deborah collapsed in the courtroom and had to be helped out by family members I hadn't known existed. The house sold 2 weeks later to a young couple with twin toddlers. I met them the day they moved in, and they were delightfully normal. The wife, Karren Sullivan, was a pediatric nurse. The husband, Walter, was a software engineer working remotely. Their twins, barely 2 years old, were absolutely fearless and immediately wanted to meet the big puppies. I carefully introduced them to Atlas and Titan under close supervision, showing the twins how to pet gently and respect the dog's space. Both dogs were patient and gentle, their training and temperament allowing them to switch seamlessly from working mode to family-friendly mode. "Deborah Morrison tried to tell us there were dangerous dogs in the neighborhood," Karren said, watching her children giggle as Titan carefully sniffed their hands. "I see now why she might have thought that, but these dogs are amazing. They're working dogs, so they take their security responsibilities seriously, but they're also very well socialized." Deborah seemed bitter about something. She kept warning us about you specifically. "We had a conflict. It escalated badly." Her son is currently serving prison time for attempted arson against my property. Karren's eyes widened. "Oh my God, and she was trying to make you sound like the bad guy. Some people never learn to take responsibility for their own actions." Autumn arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and a kind of peace I hadn't felt in over a year. Director Hammond cleared me to return to active duty in November, but in a new capacity. I became the head of the FBI's Southwest K-9 training program, working with new handler dog teams and developing certification protocols. The position was perfect. I worked with dogs every day, trained new handlers, and contributed to law enforcement without the direct field work that had proven so traumatic in Denver. Atlas and Titan officially retired from active duty and became demonstration dogs for the training program, showing new teams what excellence looked like. Patricia Lai continued as HOA president, and the neighborhood flourished under her reasonable leadership. The petty enforcement and power games ended. People felt comfortable actually using their yards and enjoying their community. Halloween decorations stayed up as long as people wanted. Dogs of all sizes were welcomed as long as they were properly cared for. I ran into Deborah one final time, almost a year after Trevor's sentencing. She was leaving the post office as I was entering, and we nearly collided. "Deborah, William." We stood there awkwardly for a moment. "How's Trevor doing?" I asked finally. "As well as can be expected in prison. He's in a medium security facility taking college classes. Maybe he'll come out better than he went in." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "I moved to an apartment in Phoenix. Couldn't afford to stay in Scottsdale after everything. I'm sorry it came to this. Are you? You got everything you wanted. You kept your dogs, you got your quiet life, and you destroyed mine in the process." "Deborah, I never wanted to destroy anything. I wanted to be left alone. You're the one who decided that couldn't happen." "I was protecting my neighborhood." "No. You were protecting your ego. There's a difference." She brushed past me without another word. I watched her get into an older car, clearly a step down from the luxury SUV she'd driven in Sagaro Heights, and drive away. I felt sad for her, but I didn't regret how things had turned out. Some people need to hit rock bottom before they can recognize their own toxicity. Winter in Arizona was my favorite season. Cool nights, mild days, perfect weather for working with the dogs. I spent Christmas with Marcus and his family, enjoying a boisterous celebration that reminded me what healthy relationships looked like. The new year brought new handler teams to train. I found deep satisfaction in teaching others how to work with their K9 partners, how to build trust and communication, how to read their dog's signals and respond appropriately. Atlas and Titan were perfect demonstration dogs, showing the new teams what years of partnership and training could achieve. Mrs. Chen organized a neighborhood New Year's party, and I brought Atlas and Titan. They were celebrities by this point, known and loved by practically everyone in Sagaro Heights. Children played with them. Adults admired their discipline and training, and I fielded dozens of questions about FBI K9 work. Karren and Walter Sullivan had become good friends. Their twins, now 3 years old, had decided that Atlas and Titan were their dogs and visited several times a week to play in the backyard under supervision. "You know what's funny?" Walter said, watching his daughter carefully feed Titan a dog treat while Atlas waited patiently for his turn. "Deborah tried so hard to convince us you were this dangerous, terrible person, but you've been the best neighbor we've ever had. You helped me fix my fence when it blew down. You taught Karren how to adjust the security system. You let our kids play with your dogs even though they are literally FBI assets." I think Deborah was so caught up in being right that she forgot how to be human. It happens more often than you'd think. "Well, her loss is our gain. This neighborhood is lucky to have you." Spring arrived with wildflowers blooming across the desert landscape. I celebrated my 9th anniversary with the FBI, my 2nd year in Scottsdale, and Atlas and Titan's combined 134 successful operations. Both dogs were getting older now, slowing down slightly, but their minds were still sharp and their training perfect. Dr. Martinez officially cleared me from therapy in March, certifying that I'd successfully processed the Denver trauma and was psychologically fit for full duty. I framed the clearance letter and hung it in my office, a reminder of how far I'd come. The HOA held elections for board positions in April. Mrs. Chen ran for treasurer and won overwhelmingly. James Rodriguez became vice president. The board's new focus was on genuine community building rather than enforcement and control. They organized movie nights, children's programs, and neighborhood improvement projects that actually improved things rather than just generating fine revenue. I was sitting in my backyard one Saturday afternoon, watching Atlas and Titan doze in the shade while I reviewed training protocols for the next class of handlers when my phone rang. Unknown number, Arizona area code. This is William Winters. Agent Winters, this is Deputy Warden Michaels from the Arizona State Prison Complex. I'm calling about Trevor Morrison. My stomach dropped. Is he okay? He's fine. Actually, he asked me to reach out to you. He's been working with our prison counselor and going through some intensive therapy. He's written you a letter and wanted permission to send it. What kind of letter? An apology, from what I understand. He's not asking for anything, not trying to get you to advocate for early parole or anything like that. He says he needs to take accountability for what he did and make amends where possible. The counselor thinks it would be beneficial for his rehabilitation, but we wanted to check with you first given the circumstances. I thought about it for a long moment. Tell him he can send the letter. But I'm not making any promises about how I'll respond. That's all he's asking for. Thank you, Agent Winters. The letter arrived 2 weeks later, several pages of handwritten text on prison stationery. Dear Agent Winters, it began. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to read this whole letter. But my counselor says that part of taking responsibility is acknowledging the harm I've caused and attempting to make amends, even when that's not fully possible. What I did was inexcusable. I planned to burn down your house, possibly with you inside, because I was angry that you'd held my mother accountable for her behavior. I've spent the last year and a half in therapy trying to understand how I became someone capable of that kind of thinking. The truth is, my mother raised me to believe that we were special, that we deserved to control our environment, and that anyone who challenged that control was an enemy. When you stood up to her, and when the neighborhood sided with you, it shattered the worldview I'd built my entire identity around. Instead of recognizing that maybe that worldview was wrong, I decided you were the problem. I was wrong. About everything. About you, about the situation, about what loyalty to my mother should look like. I let her bitterness become my bitterness, and I nearly destroyed your life because of it. I'm writing this not to ask for forgiveness, but to say that I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of what we put you through. You were just trying to live your life with your dogs in peace. The fact that I couldn't accept that I felt entitled to drive you out, says everything about who I was then. I'm trying to become someone different now. Someone who takes responsibility, who thinks before acting, who understands that other people have just as much right to exist peacefully as I do. I'm taking college classes, working with the prison counselor twice a week, and genuinely trying to understand how I became someone capable of attempted arson. I have 12 more years minimum before I'm eligible for parole. If I ever get out, I promise to stay far away from you and Saguaro Heights. You've earned your peace, and I have no right to ever disturb it again. I hope you and your dogs are doing well. I hope the neighborhood has moved past the damage my mother and I caused. And I hope that someday, even if you never forgive me, you can at least forget about me and what I tried to do. Sincerely, Trevor Morrison. I read the letter 3 times, looking for manipulation or hidden agendas, but it seemed genuinely remorseful. I showed it to Dr. Martinez during our next check-in appointment. What do you think? I asked. I think it sounds like someone who's doing genuine rehabilitation work. Whether that rehabilitation sticks long-term is impossible to know, but the sentiments here seem authentic. Should I respond? Do you want to? I thought about it. Part of me wants to. Part of me wants to tell him that I accept his apology and wish him well in his rehabilitation. But another part of me remembers finding him in my driveway with a gas can, and thinks any response just reopens communication that should stay closed. Both instincts are valid. You're under no obligation to respond to his apology or to help with his rehabilitation. That's his work to do, not yours. In the end, I decided not to respond. Trevor's rehabilitation was important, but it wasn't my responsibility. I hoped he meant what he'd written. I hoped prison was genuinely changing him into someone better, but I also recognized that my role in his story was over. Summer returned to Arizona with its punishing heat. I celebrated 2 years in Scottsdale, 2 years since the HOA drama that had consumed those first few months. The neighborhood had fully accepted me and my dogs. I had genuine friendships, meaningful work, and a sense of peace that had eluded me since Denver. Director Hammond visited in July to observe the training program's progress. He spent a day watching me work with the new handler teams, seeing how Atlas and Titan demonstrated advanced techniques, and reviewing the certification protocols I'd developed. "This is impressive work, Wesley," he said as we sat in my air-conditioned office, reviewing statistics. "Your program has a 98% first-time certification rate. That's unheard of in K9 training. Good handlers, good dogs, and clear communication. It's not complicated. It's complicated enough that nobody else has achieved these results. The director's office is taking notice. There's talk of expanding this program nationally, using your protocols as the standard for all FBI K9 teams. That would be incredible. It would also mean more responsibility for you, possible travel to other field offices, training their trainers, developing comprehensive manuals. Interested?" I looked out the window at the training yard where Atlas and Titan were resting in the shade, their work for the day complete. "Very interested, sir. This work, helping new teams develop these partnerships, it's the most fulfilled I've felt in my entire career." "Good. I'll get the paperwork started. Welcome to the next phase of your FBI career, Agent Winters." That evening, I took Atlas and Titan to the local dog park during the cooler hours. We ran into several Saguaro Heights neighbors, and the dogs played with their usual controlled enthusiasm. Karren and Walter were there with their twins and their new puppy, a German shepherd named Scout who Atlas immediately took under his wing. "Can you believe it's been 2 years since all that HOA drama?" Karren said, watching Scout try to keep up with Atlas during a game of chase. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago." Patricia told me that Deborah's completely dropped out of sight. Nobody from the neighborhood has heard from her in months. Probably for the best. She needed to rebuild her life away from all the reminders. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you just moved away when she first started harassing you?" "Sometimes. But I'm glad I didn't. This place has become home." Walter joined us, his son perched on his shoulders. "Hey, William, we're having a barbecue next weekend. You should come. Bring the dogs. I'll be there." As the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: complete contentment. The HOA drama that had dominated my first months in Scottsdale had become just another chapter in my history, one that ended with growth, community, and justice. Atlas nudged my hand with his nose, reminding me it was time to head home. Titan was already waiting by the gate, patient as always. These dogs had saved my life in more ways than one. They'd alerted me to danger, pulled me through trauma, and given me purpose when I needed it most. We walked home through the quiet streets of Saguaro Heights as twilight deepened into night. Neighbors waved from their yards. Children called out to the dogs by name. This was what community was supposed to feel like: safe, welcoming, and built on mutual respect rather than power and control. The house was cool and comfortable when we arrived. I fed the dogs their dinner, checked my emails, and settled in for a quiet evening. There was a message from Director Hammond confirming the expansion of the training program and formally offering me the position of National K-9 Training Director. I accepted immediately. 3 years after that terrible Thursday morning when Deborah Morrison had stormed across the street to call animal control on my FBI-certified K-9 units, I stood in front of a class of 50 new handler teams from across the country. Atlas and Titan, now semi-retired at 10 years old, sat on either side of me as I introduced myself. "Welcome to the FBI National K-9 Training Program," I began. "I'm Special Agent William Winters, and these are Atlas and Titan. Between them, they have over 200 successful operations, 3 commendations for valor, and more certifications than I can count. They're also the best partners I've ever had." I looked out at the eager faces, seeing younger versions of myself before Denver, before Scottsdale, before I learned that sometimes the hardest battles aren't in the field but in your own neighborhood. This program will challenge you. It will push you beyond what you think you're capable of. But if you commit to the work, if you build genuine partnerships with your dogs, if you approach this with humility and dedication, you'll become part of something extraordinary. Atlas leaned against my leg, his steady presence grounding me as always. Titan watched the class with alert, intelligent eyes. "Let's begin." The Saguaro Heights HOA continued to thrive under Patricia Lai's leadership, becoming a model for reasonable community governance. Mrs. Chen served as treasurer for 5 years before retiring to spend more time with her grandchildren. James Rodriguez wrote a book about neighborhood politics that became required reading in urban planning courses. Karren and Walter Sullivan's twins grew up playing with Atlas and Titan, learning responsibility and compassion through their interactions with the dogs. Scout, their German shepherd, eventually joined the Scottsdale Police K-9 unit. Deborah Morrison eventually moved to Tucson, where she found work as an administrative assistant. From what I heard through the grapevine, she kept to herself, avoided neighborhood politics entirely, and focused on rebuilding a simple, quiet life. Trevor Morrison served 13 years before being granted parole. He moved to New Mexico, far from Arizona and all its associations, and found work as a counselor for at-risk youth. He never contacted me again, but I heard he'd dedicated his life to preventing others from making the mistakes he'd made. As for me, I continued leading the National K-9 Training Program, traveling the country to establish new training facilities and protocols. But Scottsdale remained home, and Saguaro Heights remained my community. Atlas and Titan retired completely at 11 years old, spending their final years as beloved neighborhood ambassadors and occasional demonstration dogs for special events. When Atlas passed at 13, the entire neighborhood attended his memorial. Titan followed 6 months later, and I buried them together in my backyard with full honors. The FBI offered me 2 new K-9 partners, but I declined. Instead, I focused entirely on training others, passing along the lessons Atlas and Titan had taught me about partnership, trust, and dedication. Standing in my backyard on a cool December evening, 5 years after that first confrontation with Deborah Morrison, I reflected on how a simple HOA dispute had completely transformed my life. It had tested me, challenged me, and ultimately helped me find my true calling. The whole experience taught me that standing your ground against unreasonable authority wasn't just about personal rights. It was about setting boundaries, protecting what matters, and refusing to let bullies define your life. Deborah Morrison had tried to drive me out because I didn't fit her vision of community control. Instead, her actions had inadvertently helped me find my place in a genuine community built on respect and mutual support. The lights of Saguaro Heights twinkled in the darkness, each one representing a family, a home, a story. Mine had started with conflict but evolved into belonging. And while I missed Atlas and Titan every single day, I knew their legacy lived on through every K-9 team I trained, every handler I mentored, every successful operation that kept people safe. The HOA Karren who'd called animal control on my dogs, not realizing they were FBI-certified K-9 units, had thought she was starting a battle she'd easily win. Instead, she'd started a chain of events that led to her own downfall, her son's imprisonment, and ironically, the creation of the most successful K-9 training program in FBI history. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about these things. And sometimes, refusing to back down when you're in the right leads to outcomes nobody could have predicted. I went inside, locked up for the night, and prepared for the next day's training session. Tomorrow, a new class of handlers would arrive, eager to learn, ready to build partnerships with their K-9 companions. And I would teach them everything Atlas and Titan had taught me about courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds between handlers and their dogs. The HOA drama that had consumed those first months in Scottsdale had become a distant memory, a story I occasionally told to illustrate the importance of standing firm in your convictions. But more than that, it had become the foundation for everything good that followed. Meaningful work, genuine community, lasting friendships, and a life defined by purpose rather than trauma. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I could have sworn I felt the familiar weight of Atlas resting his head on the bed, Titan's steady breathing from his spot on the floor. They were gone, but their presence remained, woven into every aspect of who I'd become. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all. Not the conflict with the HOA, not the training programs or certifications, but the enduring impact of two remarkable dogs who'd saved my life in every way that mattered and taught me that home isn't just a place you defend. It's a place you build, one day, one relationship, one act of kindness at a time.